The Chamber of Echoes. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a monument to noise. Carved from the obsidian heart of a rogue moonlet, captured in a stable orbit, its cavernous halls reflected the shimmering, holographic banners of 1,000 starfaring species. The air, a carefully calibrated and utterly sterile mix of inert gases, carried the cacophony of 100 distinct languages. The chitinous clicks of the insectoid guitar, the melodic sonar-like whistles of the cetacean lumani, and the guttural, gravelly declarations of the silicone-based oth. Here, in the citadel that perpetually orbited the galactic core, the fate of trillions was debated, alliances were forged in whispers, and empires were humbled by votes. But today, the topic was not fate, but sport, a cruel, familiar pastime. The topic was humanity. At the central podium, suspended in a soft golden gravity field, floated Lord Vorlag of the Cathar Imperium, a being of overlapping, iridescent scaled plates and predatory grace. His voice slithered through the universal translators with a contempt so practiced it had become an art form. "We once again come to the issue of the Sol system," he began, his secondary arms gesturing with languid theatricality to a shimmering star chart. On it, a tiny, insignificant speck in the Orion arm was labeled Terra. An issue, I use the term loosely, for they are less a problem and more an absence, a void where a vibrant, contributing member of this esteemed council ought to be. A ripple of derisive chirps, grunts, and sub-vocalized laughter echoed through the chamber. This was a familiar routine, a reliable source of amusement for the elder races whose empires were measured in millennia. The silent, sullen little bipedal species from the galaxy's unfashionable outer rim was an easy, irresistible target. The insult. Vorlag let the wave of derision wash over the assembly, savoring the moment like a fine vintage. For 3 standard centuries, they have held a seat among us, a privilege granted out of a perhaps misguided sense of galactic charity. And in those 3 centuries, what have they offered? Quaint, emotional literature? A primitive, chaotic data network they call the Internet, riddled with falsehoods and pictures of their domesticated felines? He paused for the expected chuckle. They offer no technology of merit, no resources of note, and most tellingly, no voice in their own defense. He leaned forward, his form casting a long shadow, his eyes like chips of obsidian, fixing on the lone, motionless figure in the human delegation's alcove. They send one representative, year after year, to sit in silence, to absorb our wisdom, our guidance, and yes, our criticism. They are children listening at the door to the conversation of adults, hoping a few scraps of knowledge will fall from the table. The ridicule was thick, dripping with the unshakable arrogance of a species that had crushed rivals and forged an empire before humanity's ancestors discovered fire. Perhaps we have been addressing them incorrectly. Perhaps they are not silent out of respect, but because, like a simple-minded beast, they simply have nothing to say. The Sentinel. In the human alcove, designed with stark minimalism that stood in defiance of the chamber's opulence, Ambassador Arthur Clements sat perfectly still. He was an old man, with lines on his face like a faded, well-traveled map, and eyes the color of a winter sky over a frozen sea. His plain dark suit was a stark contrast to the shimmering energy robes and polished biomechanical exoskeletons that surrounded him. The universal translator in his ear rendered every jeer, every condescending remark with perfect, soul-crushing clarity. He heard it all. He registered the high-pitched, mocking laughter from the avian Zaglosians, the dismissive wave of a tentacle from the molluscoid hegemony, and the predatory, self-satisfied grin of Vorlag. He did not flinch. He did not frown. His hands, resting on the cold, inactive console before him, did not tremble. His silence was a shield, a vow, a dam holding back a force the galaxy could not begin to comprehend. To them, he was a symbol of weakness, a statue. But a statue can be a memorial, a warning, or a sentinel. Arthur Clements was a sentinel, and his long, lonely watch was almost over. Inside his mind, he recited the first line of the oath he had taken 50 years ago. I am the rock against which the arrogant break. The quiet room. Behind closed doors, half a galaxy away, the silence was of a different kind. It was the crushing, focused silence of grim determination. In a chamber deep beneath the Himalayas, shielded by kilometers of rock and arrays that actively warped space-time to prevent any form of surveillance, Earth's unified command watched the Council broadcast on a 10-second delay. Fleet Admiral Eva Rostova, a woman whose gaze seemed to carry the cold of the void, stood before a vast holographic display. She saw Arthur Clements, his face a mask of placid endurance that she knew cost him everything. She saw the sneering reptilian face of Lord Vorlag. "Log it," she said, her voice low and steady, yet it cut through the room's tension like a blade. "Log every word. Cross-reference with insult archives, classification Cathar, subcategory Imperial Arrogance, speaker index Vorlag." An officer, his face pale in the blue light of the holotank, nodded. "Yes, Admiral." Rostova turned away from the screen, unable to watch any longer. "Status report." Another officer spoke, his voice crisp. "Phase 1 construction complete. The Charon fleet is active and awaits passage. Phase 2, the Styx fleet reports 98% readiness. The Whispering Death Legions await their orders on the plains of Titan." The room was quiet, but it was the quiet of a coiled spring, of a storm gathering just over the horizon, a storm that had been brewing for 300 years. The Hidden Forges. The galaxy believed humanity's industry was confined to its own system, a quaint collection of orbital factories and asteroid mines, inefficient and provincial. They were catastrophically wrong. For a century, humanity's true forges had burned in the darkness between galaxies, in the silent, starless void where no ship ever ventured. Inside hollowed-out rogue planets, warmed by the tamed fury of fusion cores, entire fleets were born. These were not the elegant, sail-finned vessels of the Council races, designed as much for parades as for battle. Human ships were brutalist things, hulking wedges of gray neutronium-infused armor, bristling with weapon emplacements, built around engines that tore reality a new one. They were forged in secret, crewed by men and women born in the deep dark who considered Earth a revered myth. They were christened with names from old legends of reckoning, vengeance, retribution, nemesis. While the galaxy saw no voice but a silent, technologically stagnant species, humanity was building the instruments of its voice. And that voice would be the roaring thunder of 1,000 warships. The Whispering Death. On the shimmering ice fields of Europa, and the wind-scoured red deserts of Mars, new soldiers were made. They were trained in environments so lethally harsh that survival itself was the primary form of graduation. They learned to fight in absolute silence, to communicate with a glance or a subtle shift in posture, to kill with a ruthless, surgical efficiency that bordered on art. They were called the Legions of the Whispering Death, for they moved without a sound and left only a profound, chilling stillness in their wake. They were taught more than tactics. They were taught history. Every recruit was required to watch the archived council broadcasts. They saw the mockery. They memorized the faces and species of those who laughed at their homeworld. Every soldier was a living, breathing repository of a century of galactic insults. They did not train with anger, for anger is a loud and imprecise emotion. They trained with a cold, focused purpose, a unifying clarity that was terrifying in its intensity. They were waiting for a single word, a single signal to be unleashed. They were the consequence that had been so long in coming. The joke spread, becoming a self-perpetuating artifact of galactic culture. Across the myriad data networks, in the opulent zero-G lounges of alien starliners, and in the rough-and-tumble bars of trading outposts, humanity acquired a nickname: the mute species. Cathar comedians, popular across several sectors, built entire routines around their silence, their punchlines often involving a human staring blankly as a planet explodes. Xylosian pundits wrote lengthy, respected academic essays dissecting their supposed cultural pathology, attributing it to everything from atmospheric composition to a lack of evolutionary pressures. Children in Cathar schools were taught about the simple, quiet humans as a living example of an evolutionary dead end. The narrative was set in stone. Humans were harmless, backward, and, above all, silent. It was a comforting thought for the elder races, for it reinforced their own perceived place at the apex of galactic civilization. The galaxy laughed, secure in the knowledge that the little corner of the galaxy occupied by humanity would forever remain a quiet, inconsequential, and safely ignorable backwater. The observers. Humanity ignored the taunts, but it did not ignore the speakers. Earth's intelligence network, the single most underestimated organization in the galaxy, was its most brutally effective. Every broadcast was recorded. Every insult was analyzed by linguistic AIs that cross-referenced tone and gesture to measure genuine contempt. Every species that laughed was cataloged, their political structures, economic dependencies, and military doctrines dissected. Sophisticated self-evolving AIs watched trade routes, monitored military deployments, and mapped intricate supply chains. Humanity learned that Cathar were utterly dependent on a specific hypergaseous isotope for their shield generators, an isotope mined in only one nebula on the edge of their space. They learned the Xylosians had a crippling biological aversion to a certain audio frequency that could be weaponized. They learned the precise, predictable rotation schedule of the Citadel's vaunted defense platforms. They watched, they learned, and they recorded. They were building a map of their enemy's weaknesses, drawn with the ink of 1,000 insults. Silence was not inaction. It was observation. It was study. It was preparation. The signal was not a broadcast that could be intercepted. It was a ripple in the very fabric of causality, a quantum-entangled pulse, a concept most elder races had dismissed as theoretical fantasy, undetectable to any species that hadn't developed the technology in absolute secret. It emanated from the command center deep beneath the Himalayas and spread instantaneously across the vastness of space, to the hidden fleets slumbering in the intergalactic void, to the Legion barracks on Titan, where soldiers stopped their training mid-motion, to the listening posts hidden within the hollowed-out hearts of asteroids, to every colony, every ship, every soldier across human space. The signal contained no words. It was a simple binary command, from standby to active. A green light on a million consoles. The final command was yet to come, but the engines of war, silent for so long, were now humming with contained power, waiting for the order to burn. The hush signal, as the commanders called it, had been sent. The pieces, so carefully arranged over a century of patience, were now in play. The Trespasser. It appeared without ceremony, fanfare, or warning. No grand fleet, no declaration of intent. A single human warship, the UNS Retribution, slid across the shimmering, digitally enforced border into the Cathar Imperium's sovereign space. It did not power up its weapon systems. It did not hail the local patrols. It simply moved, a sliver of utter darkness against the starfield. Its advanced gravitic engines running so quietly, they were barely a whisper on the Cathar's state-of-the-art long-range sensors. On its bridge, Captain Kalen Reed watched the border marker pass on his view screen, his knuckles white as he gripped his command chair. His crew was as silent as the void outside. Every man and woman on that ship knew their role. They were the first sentence in a conversation humanity was about to have with the galaxy. The ship was a statement, a line being crossed, a challenge offered in the same language humanity had used for a century. Silence. The bluff. The Cathar Border Patrol commander, a grizzled veteran named Gorok, laughed when he saw the sensor reading. It was a dry, rasping sound, like rocks grinding together. One human ship. Old classification, likely a heavy cruiser, though its energy signature was strangely muted. "Look at them," he chittered to his bridge crew, who joined in the amusement. "The mute species has found its courage, or more likely, its primitive navigation system has finally failed." He dispatched a squadron of 3 Talon-class light frigates, sleek, predatory vessels that were the pride of the border fleet. "Escort the lost child home," he ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Fire a warning shot across its bow if it doesn't comply. Show them what real warships look like." The frigates moved to intercept, their shields shimmering with arrogant power, their weapons ports glowing with casual menace. The galaxy, monitoring the minor border incursion with idle curiosity, watched, expecting the humans to turn tail and flee in terror. It was, everyone agreed, a pathetic, almost pitiable bluff. The shot heard round the galaxy. The Cathar frigates closed in. their comms officer broadcasting arrogant, looping demands for surrender on all universal frequencies. The UNS Retribution remained silent. When the lead frigate, following Gorok's orders, fired a brilliant, harmless burst of plasma across its bow, it responded. It wasn't a laser, it wasn't a missile. From the heavily armored spine of the human ship, a sliver of pure, focused, space-time distortion lanced out. It moved faster than light, faster than thought. It did not impact the lead frigate's shields. It treated them as irrelevant. For a fraction of a second, the frigate was there, a testament to Cathar engineering, and then it was simply gone. Not exploded, erased from existence, its constituent atoms scattered across dimensions. The two remaining frigates, their crews paralyzed with a primal existential terror they had never known, were erased a moment later by two more silent, impossible shots. The silence of space was broken not by an explosion, but the horrifying absolute nothing where three starships had been. The bluff had been called. The unveiling. The moment the Cathar patrol vanished from existence, the real response began. All across the galactic map, on the borders of a dozen species that had been most vocal in their mockery, reality tore open. It was not the shimmering portal of a jump drive, it was a violent, chaotic rupture, as if space-time itself was being ripped like fabric. From these folds in the universe emerged the human fleets. Not one fleet, but 10. Thousands of warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything the Galactic Council had on record, moved into perfect, disciplined formation. They were led by the Vengeance-class dreadnoughts, ships so impossibly massive they had their own discernible gravity wells. From the observation deck of a civilian transport near the Xylosian border, an avian merchant watched in mute horror as his sky filled with gray, angular ships that had come from nowhere, blotting out the stars. The hidden forges were empty, the waiting was over. Under the banner of a unified Earth, humanity's grand fleets mobilized, their engines burning with cold, patient fury. The faltering. Back in the Grand Chamber, the session was in absolute chaos. Alarms shrieked. Delegates shouted at each other. Lord Vorlog stared at the tactical display, his iridescent scales having lost their luster, now a dull, sickly gray. The symbol for his border patrol had been replaced with a crimson icon that read, "Signal lost, presumed annihilated." Then new icons began to appear, flooding the map. Hundreds of them, thousands, all bearing the stark, unfamiliar, brutal silhouette of human warships. They weren't just on his border, they were on the Xylosian border, the Molescoid border. They were everywhere. The laughter in the chamber had died, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence that was heavier and more profound than any sound. The arrogance that had defined the Council for millennia, the bedrock of their civilization, began to crack, to falter, to crumble into dust under the weight of 1,000 silent threats made manifest. The counterattack. Pride is a hard thing to kill, especially in a species that has known nothing but victory. Enraged and profoundly humiliated, the Cathar Imperium mustered its grand battle fleet, the very symbol of its power, the fleet that had subjugated 100 worlds and had never known defeat. 200 of their finest Dominator-class capital ships, supported by 1,000 smaller vessels, jumped to intercept the human fleet on their primary border. Their fleet lord, a renowned tactician, broadcast a bombastic system-wide speech promising to grind the human insects under his heel. They expected a conventional battle. They expected to trade blows, to overwhelm the upstarts with superior numbers and centuries of honed tactical experience. They flew, full of pride and fury, into the teeth of a foe they did not understand, a foe that had been planning this single precise moment for 100 years. The revelation. The Cathar fleet opened fire, a glorious, overwhelming wave of energy that could crack a continent, and the universe changed. The human ships didn't just have shields, they had adaptive, multi-layered space-time baffles that absorbed and redirected the energy, turning the Cathar's own power against them. Cathar super lasers splashed against them like rain against a mountain. Then humanity revealed its other secrets. Swarms of self-replicating nanites, invisible to sensors, that consumed hulls and circuitry like a metallic plague. Drones that could phase through solid armor to detonate reactors from within. And the terrifying silent lances of the spinal-distorting cannons, each shot erasing a Cathar capital ship from existence. The human fleet didn't fight like a fleet. It fought like a single, coordinated organism, its tactics guided by precognitive AI that anticipated every Cathar maneuver before it was even initiated. The grand battle fleet of the Cathar Imperium was not defeated. It was systematically, calmly, and completely dismantled, piece by bloody piece. The falling worlds. With the Cathar fleet a cloud of expanding radioactive debris, the invasion began. But it was not an invasion of fire and death, for that would be inefficient. The whispering death legions descended on Cathar worlds, moving with supernatural speed and precision. They didn't bomb cities, they seized planetary comms, disabled power grids with targeted EMPs, and neutralized military command structures in a matter of hours, sometimes minutes. On the Cathar capital, a single Legion squad rappelled down the central spire of the Imperial Palace, moving through its corridors like ghosts. The guards were neutralized with non-lethal sonic pulses before they could even raise their weapons. The planetary governor was taken into custody while he was in the middle of a speech decrying human cowardice. There was no grand battle, no heroic last stand for the Cathar. One by one, their planets went silent. Their colonies fell under human control, the populations locked down before they even knew they were at war. The efficiency was as terrifying as any violence. This was not conquest. This was pest control. The warning. In the council chamber, the truth finally dawned. It settled like a cold, heavy shroud upon the stunned delegates. Many of them were frantically reviewing historical records of their interactions with humanity, their aides bringing up footage from decades past. They saw Ambassador Clement's placid face in 100 broadcasts, and now his stillness looked less like submission and more like the coiled patience of a predator. A wizened Lumani historian, his sonar clicks trembling with dawning horror, addressed the chamber. "We did not see," he whistled, the translator rendering his tones as a funerary dirge. Their silence, it was not an absence of speech. It was the presence of observation. We thought we were watching a student. We were being studied by a scientist, an executioner. The silence of humanity had never been weakness. It had never been fear. It was a warning they had all been too arrogant to hear. It was the sound of 1,000 forges burning in the dark, the patience of a people recording every slight, every insult, waiting for the debt to come due. The final message. The human Grand Fleet did not stop at the Cathar border. It moved, a relentless, unstoppable tide of gray steel and silent engines, toward the galactic core, toward the Citadel. The Council's vaunted defense fleet, a patchwork collection of ships from a dozen different species, powered up their weapons, their commanders sending panicked, contradictory messages to their respective governments. But the human fleet did not fire. It stopped, arranging itself into a perfect, silent sphere around the Council's moonlet, an act of orbital mechanics so precise it was a message in itself. Thousands of warships, their weapon ports open, their engines glowing with contained power, waited. From the Citadel's observation decks, the sky was blotted out. There were no stars. There was only the gray, unforgiving hull of human dreadnoughts. The show of force was absolute. The message was clear. We can erase you. We are choosing not to. For now. Deep, steady documentary voice. Calm but serious tone. Clear enunciation. No exaggeration. Smooth pacing. Avoid overdramatic pauses. The voice of humanity. A single encrypted channel opened, broadcasting to every alcove in the Council chamber, to every species in the galaxy. A single face appeared on the main view screen, the old, tired face of Ambassador Arthur Clements, still sitting in his alcove, the chaos of the chamber reflected in his calm eyes. For the first time in a century, the human delegation spoke. His voice was not a shout of triumph or a growl of anger. It was calm, measured, and heavier than a dying star. For 300 years you have talked, and we have listened, he said, his eyes seeming to meet those of every being in the chamber, every leader watching from their distant throne world. You called our silence weakness. You mistook our patience for fear. You have learned nothing of us. He leaned forward slightly, a minuscule movement that captivated the attention of a galaxy. The air grew thin. We tried peace. We honored your traditions. We sat at your table, and we endured your scorn because we hoped you would one day see us as equals. You chose to see us as children. A deep collective shame fell upon the chamber. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was louder than any explosion, you will meet the other side of us. The channel closed. Ambassador Arthur Clements stood up, straightened his simple suit, and walked out of the alcove, the doors hissing shut behind him. The silence that followed was different. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of fear. Humanity had finally spoken, and the galaxy would never be loud again.